I think it can't be overstated how stressful, you talked about the stress, the compounding stress of getting through this situation, this litigation, and the steep learning curve that was associated with it. Not only was it expensive in dollars, but also expensive in the amount of time it took you to manage this and deal with this, as far as getting through it as best you could with your business.
The Small Business Rundown is the official podcast of the National Federation of Independent Business, the member-driven voice of small business. NFIB and our members advocate to keep America's small businesses strong and independent in Washington, D.C., all 50 states, and the nation's courts.
Welcome to the Small Business Rundown, a bi-weekly podcast with information on independent business victories and challenges in Washington, D.C., and state capitals. I'm Holly Wade, Executive Director of NFIB's Research Center, and our guest host this week. The Americans with Disabilities Act, referred to as ADA, is complex, and many small business owners aren't aware that their businesses' websites are required to comply with the ADA. ADA-focused lawsuits targeting small businesses are increasingly common, and if you're a small business owner, it's important to take steps to make sure your website is compliant and minimize your liability. Joining me to discuss the issue of ADA lawsuits and tips for small business owners looking for ways to get and stay compliant is Vice President and Executive Director of the NFIB Small Business Legal Center, Beth Melito. Next, to zoom in on the issue from the perspective of small business owners, we'll talk with NFIB member Jim Crooks from Clarion, Pennsylvania. Beth, thanks for taking time to talk with us about this issue. Can you kick us off by explaining what the Americans with Disabilities Act is?
Sure, and thank you for having me today, Holly. The Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA, was enacted in 1990 and signed into law by President George H.W. Bush, and it was landmark civil rights legislation that guarantees equal opportunity for individuals with disabilities. The ADA, as it applies to small businesses and NFIB members, requires that facilities and businesses that are open to the public, i.e. public accommodations, be accessible to people with disabilities. The open to public has now been broadened to encompass websites, if that is part of how the business sells its services and goods to the public.
So websites now fall under the ADA, right?
That is correct.
Okay.
Yes.
What would be a first good step for small businesses to take in starting to review and updating their website?
That's a great question. NFIB has resources on its website that can help businesses do a first review of their websites to determine whether or not sort of minimum barriers have been removed from the website. So in other words, is there a way that somebody who is blind can turn on, the read out loud, if that's a possibility there too. There are also a lot of experts out there and vendors that can do a scrub of a business website too, to let you know whether or not it is accessible and whether or not you might be subject to a disability claim.
Great. Good information to have. Can you explain how websites are targeted for lawsuits if not compliant?
So when I started at NFIB about 20 years ago, I heard from members who were targeted with ADA lawsuits. But at that time, it was often related to the physical structure. So for instance, they didn't have a sufficient number of handicapped parking spaces. Their bathroom wasn't wide enough for a wheelchair. But as time has gone on, I've heard from more and more members, particularly over the last 5 years, and with the growth of the internet to transact business, more and more small business owners and NFIB members who have been targeted with ADA lawsuits that allege the business's website was not in compliance. And what has made this very difficult for business owners is there is not one standard for website compliance. In fact, there is no federal rule or regulation. So you don't know exactly what is or is not going to be ADA compliant. There are experts out there that will tell you can run your website through some of these online. vendors that will tell you, oh, your website needs this or your website needs to do that. But at the end of the day, you're not ever going to be completely sure whether sort of all your I's are dotted or T's are crossed when it comes to website compliance, because we do not have a set federal standard. And that makes it very confusing for business owners and also opens them up to these predatory plaintiffs and plaintiffs' attorneys who are going out and filing these ADA lawsuits en masse.
Now we'll take a short break.
9 out of 10 small businesses are facing a massive tax hike at the end of this year. Congress can pass the One Big Beautiful Bill Act to stop the small business deduction from expiring in December. Ask your tax advisor how much your business is deducting each year and tell Congress to make the deduction permanent at smallbusinessdeduction.com.
Welcome back to the Small Business Rundown. Now I want to welcome NFIB member Jim Crooks, owner of FL Crooks in Clarion, Pennsylvania. Jim, we appreciate you taking a few minutes to talk about this issue and shed some light from your experience. To begin, could you share a bit about your business, what you do, and how long you've been a small business owner?
Well, the store started in 1905 by my great uncle Frank, and my grandfather carried the store through the Depression. And then my father, who was a D-Day survivor, came back from the war and took it over in the 40s. And I started working when I was in college and continued on. So I cannot believe how quickly the time has gone and how many changes has transpired. So the store always was a men's store for many years, and then we added women's in 1989. And it's a 10,000 square foot store, and we employ 7 full-time people, professionals, and we have a wonderful business, and we really have become more of a destination shop.
That's great. What is the range of products that you sell in your store?
We sell everything from, because we are rural, we have to have things for young people. We have to have things for professionals, and we have a big suit business and tailor-made business and tailor-made shirts. And our women's store, it has a lot of jewelry. It's a 10,000 square foot store. We have probably over 300 different vendors. So it's a full-time job for sure.
That is a
Plus
large
some.
operation. We'd like to understand more about your small business and how it was impacted by an ADA lawsuit. Can you explain what happened?
I was sitting up in the office one day, and my staff came out and said, Jim, someone is here to see you. And I walked down, and there was this gal. She said, are you James Crooks? And I said, yes. She handed me this paper, and I thought, what's this? She said, you have been served. That's what she said. And she said, will you sign this? I said, well, I don't even know what this is. I'm not signing anything. And then she literally ran out the door. I think she thought I was going to come after her or something, but I've never experienced something like that. It was like a TV set, something you see on television. And I was stunned. I really thought it was a joke until I started really digging in. It was filed in the U.S. District Court, the Southern District of New York, and it was a civil action. And when I started reading it, I was like, this woman is suing us because she couldn't buy a pair of Dansko shoes over our website. She couldn't see the product. She was partially blind. And she was accusing us of our website of not being ADA compatible.
Incredibly stressful. What did the added cost, so the settlement and the legal fees, what did that mean for your business and how you had to absorb those costs and continue operating?
It's like I have capital, but that money is all used for, finance, inventory purposes. If I had been earlier in my career, when I still was buying the business from my parents and buying the building, I would have really been in a much more difficult situation. But I think for me personally, it was more the personal stress that caused me more than the money. The whole thing, including the attorney fees, ended up costing about $20,000. And it was it was a process, like I couldn't believe this is happening. And and when we started investigating it, we discovered that she had filed 47 other cases. And then we were following her every week. It was two more and two more and two more. And she wasn't going after the Amazons, the Walmarts, because they know they have lawyers. They know they have the resources to fight something like this. The lists contained little all over the country, bicycle shops, candle stores, little mom and pop jewelry stores, businesses much smaller than my business. And when you look at the list, you can just see all these people. I just can't imagine them all going through that, and that the pain and the fear kind of small business having to deal with this issue. So my first response, so I had of course, I'm in Clarion. We have wonderful attorneys, but we don't have anybody that specializes in ADA matters, as you can imagine. Even in Pittsburgh, I couldn't seem to find anybody that specialized in that. So I have a really good customer outside of New York City that comes to see me, and I said, I need some help. Is this? I don't even know if this is real. He said, send me everything, Jim. I'll take a look. And he looked and he said, no, this is legit. But he said, I don't specialize in anything with ADA. I'm more of a corporate attorney. So he said, let me dig around and find someone. And he found this guy, this attorney up in Boston that handles these specific cases and negotiates with them to get the amount of money down. So I said to them, I said, well, I'm going to go up there and I'm going to go to court. And they said, well, what are you going to say? And I said, well, I'm going to say I can prove that I am as compliant as you possibly can be. In fact, there's a site you can go on and that will review your website, and it'll tell you how compliant you are. And I can prove to them that I am 98% compliant. And they said to me, so you're 2% guilty. You're guilty. And guess what? If you're guilty, you will have to pay all her attorney fees, which won't be a little amount. It will be a huge amount. And they highly recommended me not doing that, because it'll end up costing you so much more money. You hire people, you have to have confidence that they're telling you the truth, and I did. And this man was very honest, and I would recommend him to anybody because he really talked turkey to them, and he really got their portion down as possibly low. This went on, the negotiations with them, for at least 6 weeks until they pretty much said, this is all we're going to pay you. But he charged $500 an hour on 6-minute increments. So I became a very fast talker, and I really had my, every 6 minutes it was another $50 bill. But he was a very good attorney, and I appreciate what he did. But the lawsuit came through in August 23, and it lasted until end of October until we settled. And I think it was harder on me emotionally, just because, I'm a small fry and I'd never really been sued before. My friend Kevin, he kind of talked me off the edge several times. He said, you need to take a breath, Jim. Lots of people get sued. This is normal. So when I finally just wrote the check and paid my obligations, I just was relieved that it was done. But what do you do going forward? How do you protect yourself for the next person that had trouble with your website? And our website was started in 1989. It was one of the first websites on there, and my wife runs it. We have about 8,000 items on our website, and we have over 36,000 items in the store, but it's very labor intensive. And we do just 6% of our volume on the website today. Earlier on, we were doing much more, but then what's happened is so many, probably every one of my vendors have their own websites today. And then you have the mammoth Amazon out there. And all of my vendors will not allow me to sell on any third party. If you want to carry the line, they do not want to be on Amazon. They do not want to be on Walmart.com, those type of things, They want to be kept as a specialty store. So that's kind of the story. Once the settlement was gone, I really emotionally had to kind of let it go and say, this is the world, isn't always fair to any of us. It only hurts me to carry it around on my shoulder. So that's kind of really my story.
I think it can't be overstated how stressful, you talked about the stress, the compounding stress of getting through this situation, this litigation, and the steep learning curve that was associated with it. Not only was it expensive in dollars, but also expensive in the amount of time it took you to manage this and deal with this, as far as getting through it as best you could with your business. What advice would you give other small business owners going through an ADA lawsuit that you wish you had known at the beginning of this?
I think it's wise to realize that this can happen to you. This is not just big city, or they're after little people, mom and pops. And really my business is a mom and pop, Also, the first thing my attorney did was ask me, did you check with your insurance company? Are you covered for this type of thing? And I did. And they were very quick saying, no, we don't cover that. It's not in your policy. And I read the policy. It's not in the policy. So I had to really look and find an insurance company. And that's one thing that I have done. Find an insurance company that will cover this type of lawsuits again. That's another layer of expense on top of you every year, every single year, facing small business. And so you always have challenges, one after another lately. But this law needs changed. That's the bottom line. It needs changed and reworded. I agree that everyone should have equal rights. I am not against any handicapped person, whether they be blind or can't walk across the street or whatever. But the way it is worded, it has opened up this whole wide thing for these hungry law firms that really have lost their moral compass, as far as I'm concerned. And they have these associates sitting there, and they're going, hey, go after this, see how much money we can generate for this business. Oh, and then the other thing, when they said that I would have to pay for their legal fees, I knew I was lost there, because they would have been very expensive. But that's one thing I learned, and I would recommend, is people discuss with their insurance companies if they have that kind of coverage. And I do think that there are more insurance companies that are providing that. My regular insurance, my building and inventory and liability insurance, they won't cover it. But I think there are some firms. So I think every small business should be aware that this is a threat to their business. And how do you minimize that threat?
That makes sense. Very good advice. On that note, Beth, over the years and looking ahead, how is the NFIB fighting for ADA reform?
So Jim raised the point too about how compliance with the ADA is really just so tricky and complex, because the law and the regulations are not very clearly written, particularly when it comes to ensuring that you are in compliance with regards to your website. In fact, there are no regulations. So it's really, I don't want to say anything goes, but courts are all over the place on what standard they apply, which makes it incredibly difficult to ensure that you are in compliance. And as Jim pointed out, if you're 2% out of compliance, you're out of compliance, which is just so unfortunate. So getting back to your question, Holly, what has NFIB been pushing for? We have been pushing for the right for business owners to correct the defect, whether it's their bathroom is not wide enough for a wheelchair to get in, or their website is not accessible to somebody who may have an impairment, a sight or hearing impairment there. So the right for business owners to correct the defect before a plaintiff can file a lawsuit. So we've asked for, say 30 days or 45 days, a reasonable time for the business owner to get into compliance before a lawsuit can be filed there. Because really the intent of the Americans with Disabilities Act is to ensure that individuals who are disabled have access to the same accommodations that, everyone does. It is not to line the pockets of plaintiffs' attorneys. That was not the intent of the law. So that has been a big thing. NFIB has been pushing for the right to, make those corrections before a lawsuit is filed. And then also too, for better and clearer rules on what website compliance means. So there is a standard that everybody knows what the standard is. It's on the government website, and everybody can turn to that, and the courts will all enforce the same standard too. That would also be helpful.
That would be very helpful for so many small business owners. Jim, on your end, what's your message to Congress as they consider future legislation?
Well, they're always saying how the backbone of the economy is small business, right? We've all heard that how many times. So they need to put their money where their mouth is, or put their rules and consider how these rules affect small business and they're passing. We don't have the resources to do everything that we can. And, they're always tooting about how great small business is and employs more people than anything else. And at the NFIB, it is tough out there right now. It is tough. But, small business, they just keep pushing on, never give up. When my dad passed away of Alzheimer's, and, it was 10 years of him slipping. And he wrote me this rule, and he said, the 3 rules of success. First rule number 1, never give up. Rule number 2, never give up. Rule number 3, go back and read rule number 1, And I've always remembered that by him. Never give up, keep pushing forward. And that's the beauty of this country. That's what this country's made with. Small business people building, pushing, working. I've had 50 years of working 6 days a week. And now I'm taking off Mondays, although I find myself still working. But that's my story.
Very good words, wise words from your father to live by for small business owners, but for all of us. Thank you so much for sharing your experience. Before we go, Beth, is there anything else small businesses should know about ADA compliance?
Well, I would just point to Jim's comments about finding a good attorney if you are unfortunately hit up with a lawsuit. One, take it seriously, don't ignore it, which I think is what Jim's friend, who's the attorney, said. Yes, this is legit, unfortunately. But then finding a good attorney or an attorney rather who has experience with handling an ADA claim is very important. And I'm glad to hear that Jim was successful in finding someone who was able to negotiate, a much smaller settlement there. That is key. We had an attorney from the law firm of Epstein, Becker and Green, Min Vu, produce a webinar for NFIB that is on our website, nfib.com/webinars. And Min walks through in part website compliance there, which I think would be very helpful. We also put together a legal guide to help small businesses ensure ADA compliance, and that is also free and available on our website too. So we've got a couple resources on the NFIB website. And of course, business owners can reach out to the Legal Center at info@nfib.org with any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Beth, and thank you, Jim, for joining us for today's podcast. As mentioned, the NFIB Legal Center Guide on ADA website accessibility and how to avoid lawsuits link is in the show notes for more detail and guidance to start reviewing your website. If there's anything you'd like us to cover on the podcast, please email us at podcast@nfib.org. Now, I want to thank you, the listener, for joining us on today's Small Business Rundown. We'll be back every 2 weeks, bringing you news and analysis from Washington, D.C. and state capitals, so that you, whether you're a business owner or supporter of one, can continue to blaze the trail.
The Small Business Rundown is brought to you by NFIB, the voice of small business. You can find us at nfib.com and on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn.